Bengals head coach Zac Taylor hinted at what would be a very unconventional move for Cincinnati to make, and in this video, I'll explain what we should expect to happen. Hi again, Bengals fans. John Sheeran of A to Z Sports Cincinnati here, and there seems to be just a little bit more clarity about what the Bengals are going to do at both guard spots. Obviously, this topic has become quite contentious amongst the fan base, considering that the team basically did nothing to address the issue in free agency outside of signing Lucas Patrick to a minimum one-year deal. And it is clearly by a country mile the biggest weakness remaining on the roster, and to have it be such a glaring weakness entering the draft feels like malpractice on the Bengals' part. And just like we discussed when we broke down my early prediction for what the Bengals are going to do with their first round pick, this is not too uncommon for the Bengals to do, to have glaring holes on their roster entering the draft, setting themselves up to basically just address need very early in the draft. And that does seem to be the plan with the Bengals. They've met with a handful of college left tackles that have the capability to maybe move inside the guard, which they've done with Andrew Whitworth, they've done with Jackson Carman, they did with Cordell Volson. Obviously, the hit rate there is, 1 for 3, but still, that's history. So it does seem like by the end of the third round of the draft, the Bengals will have drafted someone that they feel can compete and potentially start at either left or right guard. But what about after the draft? What if after the dust settles, when some teams didn't address the needs like they wanted to in the draft, there are still veteran options able to sign on before OTAs and offseason workouts begin? Will the Bengals be involved in that process? Historically, this has not been the case. Specifically in the Zac Taylor era, there are only two examples that you can really point to where the Bengals were in the month of May and they looked out for veteran options for guys who have a good chance of making the team. Back in 2021, the Bengals held tryouts in the month of May, particularly with a lot of younger players, but Trent Taylor, who was a veteran at the time, he played for the San Francisco 49ers, he was a part of that tryout, and he eventually earned a one-year deal, and he stuck around with the team for a couple years, mainly on special teams and kickoff returns and stuff like that. A couple of years later, Trevor Siemian came in for a free agent visit early in the month of April. The Bengals were interested in drafting potentially a backup quarterback in that year's draft. They didn't draft a quarterback, so Siemian signed on for a one-year free agent deal just a week after the draft in May. But veteran free agency happens a lot more often around the league, considering that, you're probably not going to address all your needs in the draft, and there's still guys that can help you out and maybe don't want to go through an entire full offseason with the team. And down at the annual league meetings this week, head coach Zac Taylor did mention something interesting regarding the guard spot. When asked about the current state of the position, he said, quote, "I think right now at guard, we will get to the draft and then evaluate where we're at from there." Both Paul Dehner Jr. of The Athletic and Jeff Hobson of Bengals.com mentioned that Taylor said they're going to hold off on signing a guard until after the draft, which I think is pretty notable because it seems like the names that they've been connected to, I'm talking about Brandon Scherff and Will Hernandez, it seems like those guys would be more inclined to wait until after the draft where there's more clarity about, hey, I want to make sure that wherever I'm going, I'm going to have a really good chance to start. And if the Bengals just draft one offensive lineman who can start this year at guard, there would still be a massive window of opportunity for either one of those guys to come in and start right away. So that does make sense, and it is encouraging to hear Zac Taylor say it, but there's still a reservation that I have about all of this. Because it is one thing for Taylor or Director of Player Personnel Duke Tobin to say these things about the plans and what the roster looks like and yada, yada, yada. Tobin notably said at the NFL Scouting Combine that he doesn't want to go out there and pay more for the exact same team, and wouldn't you know it, the team right now doesn't look a whole lot different than it did last year. I do question how aligned Taylor and Tobin are with the rest of the front office, particularly with the ownership group who actually ends up writing these checks and signing off on all these moves. I do question if whether or not Tobin and Taylor see things differently as to what the actual plan is going to be, because if they don't have ownership support, then nothing happens. Which makes me question if there's actually going to be an effort to go out and get a guy like Scherff or Hernandez or whomever they have their eyes on at guard. On the other hand, there could be some sort of agreement here between the team and one of these players that would sign after the draft. The draft passes, there's a rookie coming into town, but there's still a starting job open, and then the team's like, hey, you still want to do this? And the player says, yeah, I'll do this. So I think that's what we have to look out for. Nothing is going to happen between now and the start of the draft. But once the draft unfolds and then they draft a guard, we will see if anything changes then and if there is some sort of a new addition that comes in following the draft. There is more to get to down there in Florida at the NFL annual meetings, and we will cover that all from a Bengals lens right here on A to Z Sports Cincinnati.